And welcome back, everybody, to Hands On Apologetics. Well, you know, there is a demographic out there that is growing, and it's the spiritual but not religious graphic. And Chris, welcome back to Hands On Apologetics.
Hey, Gary. Thanks for having me back. Good to see you.
I know in your blog and also on your channel, you treat this subject, the spiritual but not religious category, very well, because in a way you came from that point of view, haven't you?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, spiritual but not religious has some parallels to atheism and even agnosticism especially, but say atheism as well. There's something I want to start here with that's going to be a bit broader, and then we'll kind of narrow in, right, as far as just the fundamental issue with sort of spiritual but not religious. And while I'll start in the broader context of it's just been a problem since the garden, right, of disobeying orders and resisting authority and wanting to live according to your own life or on your own terms, right? So, you know, we understand the story in the garden of this now temptation to be gods ourselves, right? To live our own truth, to be the arbiters of good and evil, to like, okay, I can just love myself and be my own self and just do whatever I want and decide what's good and evil and decide what's authority and what's not authority. So this problem obviously goes back a long way. So I mentioned in this class last night, I said, this is something, it's important to zone in on this. It's why it makes the Old Testament alone such a rich, corpus of books and works, because it really tells a lot about the human experience, about a particular people, right? But, you know, I've said that you can find every possible kind of problem, struggle we have as human beings in Scripture, and in particular in the Old Testament. It tells a story very much of how we get on together as humankind and all the temptations, struggles, sins, etc., that we face in every possible way. That, again, I'm trying to just stay a little bit broader now. But there have been periods throughout history, just in the last 2,000 years. In fact, if we include the Catholic Church, right? What did we see in the first few hundred years of Catholic history? Other movements having challenges with Catholic authority or Catholic teacher and Catholic understanding, you know, theology or its ecclesiology or what, you know. It's and wanting to break off and say, well, we have actually a correct truth, or we don't agree with what you're doing, so now we're going to rebel and we're going to kind of create our own kind of understanding of truth. Now, they may have a valid reason for breaking, but as we found throughout history, in none of those cases did they really have a valid reason, particularly like schisms, movements that tried to schism from the Catholic Church, right? That it ended up, and we have years of documents in history now and within church history that refuted all those movements and very well refuted them and showed how they just basically fell on their faces theologically or ecclesiologically at the end of the day, and why they didn't end up kind of holding, you know, up much over time.
Obviously, it's implicit there in the garden, but is there this idea that institutional forms of religion is somehow itself like the arbiter of error and darkness?
Yeah, I think a lot of people end up forming that opinion, and I think they have been doing this for thousands of years, right? That, these, you know, this big bad big brother authority now is trying to control every part of my life and, you know, just basically wants to kind of operate me on puppet strings, and I just have to follow along, you know, toe the line and follow suit and be that way. When you find out, like, for example, within our own faith tradition, and including Judeo-Christian faith tradition, this is about living a right-ordered life. Like, here is a foundation how to live, in a relationship, a good, wholesome, healthy relationship, in this case, you know, with God, right? And yes, it means having a more disciplined, again, right-ordered, purposeful life and how you're building that relationship. And that sometimes means following some certain rules and regulations and keeping yourself in check, right? Keeping yourself accountable and responsible.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and again, that goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden, right? I mean,
that's right.
Ultimately, it's kind of the ultimate individualism.
Right. And now to kind of, you know, fast forward to say like about the last 60 years, and particularly here in the West, I know in the last segment, And sometimes in trying to give some historical context, I mean, when you try to blaze through about just the last 4,000 or 5,000 years, there are like hundreds of thousands of examples, right, of this problem of again wanting to live by your own truth and versus following what is truth and what's correct. But we see here in the West, and for some good reason, we have with the birth of the civil rights movements in the '60s. With some of its original intention, there was some inherent, goodness, but there's also a lot of challenges in execution, and some of the things we've seen manifest, since today, which can open the door to kind of more, political discussions, or even just, even what we're seeing here, just a lot of ideological warfare in, 2023 now and modern day. But what we have seen in particular, again, here in Western society, and we're seeing it, in parts, other parts of the world as well, is, with freedom, comes responsibility, but it seems we've divorced freedom from accountability and responsibility, right? We just want to kind of live our own lives, do what we want to do, live our own truth. If as long as it's not hurting anybody else, all that we do, particularly with sin, is going to affect, there's a chain reaction, whether indirectly or directly, how we live our lives is going to affect other people, right? And potentially perpetuate sin. But, in the last segment, I'd mentioned some movements or over time throughout history that were, sort of built on this idea of like rebelling against authority. We know or even understanding, the human purpose of, these kind of big existential questions that came out of the Enlightenment. And, and way before that, we had the Reformation, right? This rebellion against authority, again, a new search for truth, finding again our truth or my truth versus what's being, told out there. But we've seen, again, going back to Western society, this by decade, loosening up of morals and values and kind of just moving away more from accountability and responsibility. Like there's almost like this picture of we were just suffocating, right? That's the history of Western society. We were just so drowning in rules and responsibilities and discipline and taking, away human rights. Okay. That, there was just, we had to basically do a 180 as a society, okay, and live a freer society, an even freer society. But with that, though, right, it still comes responsibilities, being accountable and responsible. What would like a true anarchistic society, like total anarchy? Well, we don't know what that looks like right now, but, right. We have an idea of what that could look like, okay, if everybody wanted to live by their own rules or whatnot, okay. But it's also affect, obviously, the search for spiritual truth, okay, and particularly about Christian faith and Catholic Christian faith being rooted in because being rooted in tradition and scripture, we have guidelines to how we live out our faith, how we practice the liturgy, how we participate in it, how we go about living a Catholic life, including, the sacraments and what that means, the process to receive sacraments and stuff. And that all has an order, in a good order, because it's 2,000 years of it, and very consistent overall, which you'd think would be something that we could possibly appreciate. Because when you think about just the Catholic Church alone for a minute, there's no other institution, from the institutional standpoint, in the last 2,000 years, that survived 2,000 years of world history and is still here talking about it, okay, and dealing with the same issues, okay, moral issues, right, and moral relativism, still trying to kind of teach the gospel to the world, share it, and bring people into more accord and right ordered and living a more organized life, right? Their belief in God, having a more organized, purposeful life.